Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Piz. Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 7th of January 2025. We're going to start with this, is it news? What came out, the interview with Lex Friedman the other day between Zelensky and Friedman, where Zelensky said, and I've talked about this previously, but he has said, look, we need the 300 billion from the frozen Russian assets. As he says, take 300 billion from the frozen Russian assets. We'll take that and we'll buy all the weapons from the US. We don't need gifts. It will benefit your industry, and the US will invest Russian money, not Ukrainian or European. There needs to be some caveats there, because actually those frozen Russian assets are broadly from the EU rather than from the US. Actually, a lot of them are held up in Euroclear and in Belgium. So it could be a little bit controversial to say we're going to take all the frozen Russian assets that the EU has allowed us to get and spend them all in the US. But what he's trying to say is, look, he's really appealing to the US, to Trump. Say, look, we don't want to spend your taxpayers' money. We'll happily spend $300 billion of frozen Russian assets if you give us all the assets. And do you know what? We'll spank that on your stuff. You will make some money out of us doing this. And that'll be good news. So please allow us to do that. Yeah, there was a really interesting thing that came out recently. Oh, no, actually, we are coming to that. I thought I'd forgotten it, but it is in the list. So I think this is sound bit of reasoning. He knows who to appeal to. He needs to appeal to Trump in a transactional manner, which is what he's doing here, I think. And a lot of people have been calling out for a long time that all of that money should be given in toto to Ukraine, to Zelensky. And he's calling for it. Whether this will happen, I think they erred on the side of caution with giving the loan underwritten by the frozen Russian assets profits because it was legally simpler. They're less likely to come back and bite them on the arse. But do you know what? I think we need to be really strong. We need to make bold moves in helping Ukraine. And this is a way that we can help Ukraine maximally with minimum cost to ourselves. Hugely important. Ukraine, I had a comment from someone the other day, it might be John Oliver, I think, saying that, hey, hang on, looking at Kiel Institute tracker and say, look, the EU and Europe has given more equipment or pledged more equipment to Ukraine than the US. But actually, the US has given far more of its pledged equipment than the EU, and the percentage of what they've given is relatively high. Well, actually, not necessarily the case, at least according to Zelensky. So Ukraine has received less than half of the US aid allocated during the full-scale war. Zelensky said he's not received even half of the $177 billion the US allocated to Kyiv throughout the war, he said in that interview with Lex Friedman. Now, this amount of money, there's controversy over exactly how much they're getting from the US, where that's coming from, what it entails, which pot is going to where, and so on and so forth. So there's just a lack of understanding, I think, or lack of anyone knowing exactly what it is. I think that they've received from the US, both in terms of pledged and received, but also, they're getting things from different places like the IMF and the World Bank and here and there, and then the grants. Then there are strings attached loans, and even the grants probably strings attached. And then there's amount of money that's apportioned to Ukraine, but it's not actually given. So, for example, Presidential Drawdown Authority is just the perceived value of these pieces of equipment that are sent from stockpiles, but it's not like taking money out of the US bank and then giving that to Ukraine. It's like giving stuff that's already been bought and paid for. And the question is, okay, what do you do about replacement for that? And will it be like for like, and how much money are you spending? And actually, is that money you're spending really being spent on upgrading the US military equipment rather than being spent like on Ukraine? So there's so many caveats to all, with all the different nations about what they're giving and what is actually, money out of the taxpayers, money out of the treasury that goes to Ukraine, right? So anyway, with all of those caveats in place, the claim here is that the US has delivered half of what they had promised. Now, this is where it gets a little bit controversial. I asked the USA says Zelensky, to transport weapons by Ukrainian planes so as not to overpay American companies, but they refused me because, of course, the US would want to pay American companies to deliver American equipment. It is part of this economic stimulus. The problem is the overcharging. So, quote, we could have received more weapons, but we had to pay for these expensive planes. So, if they're buying stuff of the US and the US say, well, you have to deliver it using these carriers, then that's costing, if it's being paid for by Ukraine, then that's costing Ukraine a lot more than it needs to because of the overcharging. We had to pay for these expensive planes. So some companies are lobbying for such decisions. And this is where the military industrial complex or adjacent industries are they are making a quick buck out of this, or at least more than they need to. It's a bit like in my partner is a business manager in education. It's like as soon as you get out a school's order book for, I don't know, stationery or whatever, straight away they've whacked the price up, that you could go and buy this stuff down the works or down the range or whatever for cheaper, but because it's education, they put a premium on that because they know, you're going to pay this, or you're at school, you're government owned or whatever, and so they put the price up, and it's really, really frustrating. This happens an awful lot, and these companies here will be doing that. It's like, we know it's the government paying, it's the DoD paying, or it's the Ukrainian government eventually going to have to pay, so we can just charge what we like type thing. And that's the kind of making a pretty penny out of it side of things that I don't like. It's not that the military industrial complex or adjacent industries are cynically, I mean, you can make this argument, but that they're cynically, want this war to carry on so that they can make this huge profit. They are going to make a profit, right? If they don't make a profit, you don't have private industries helping out in this particular domain where you really need them to help out, right? You can't just have solely state-run enterprises in the military-industrial complex. So you need to have profit-making enterprises involved in this. But the question is, when is too much profit? When is profit too much? What stage you're going? I can allow you making that on this missile, but making that on that missile, that's ridiculous. And then the argument is, but we've got to do R&D and research and development. It's hugely expensive when you're doing weapons testing and trying to find out the next thing that you need, etc., etc. But when it comes to like planes carrying this equipment, it's harder to argue that in terms of R&D and the need to make over and above in terms of profit. And so, that is profiteering. So some companies are lobbying for such decisions, but I could not speak about it out loud, said Zelensky. I did not want to incite a scandal. Therefore, when talking about corruption, one should ask, if there were $177 billion and we received half, then where is the rest? So is that they haven't received half of that stuff, or is that money that's been apportioned to them is poorly spent? So going back to this idea that they've only received, the Kyiv Independent saying they've only received half of that, or is actually, and I'd need to go to what he says to the original source of his words, but I mean, if this is accurately quoted, then it's more like, it's not that they haven't received half of the stuff they've been pledged, but actually this is a comment about, well, half the money is just being spanked up the wall on expensive planes type thing, and that's very different to pledged versus delivered. So caveats there, need some unpicking. I'm telling you both sides. Okay, French aid to Ukraine says, a little bird whispered to me that all 26 Mirage 2000-5s could end up, so the French ones, could end up in Ukraine, in line with the 26 Ukrainian fighter pilots that France has publicly announced it will train. How accurate that is, I don't know. But he says, all I can say is that Dassault Aviation is under pressure to increase deliveries of Rafales to the French Air Force to replace the Mirage 2000-5. So these are older planes. They are going to be phased out. They are still in service with France, and they are only giving potentially, I don't know, we hear different numbers. There's 3 imminent, 6, 12, 20. I think 12 is what people are safely saying at the moment. But they have 26 they could give, but they don't want to give planes that they are presently using. But then if there's also pressure on Rafale, on Dassault to increase the Rafales, then it could be that France are up for phasing these out quicker and getting these to Ukraine. We already know that France has said in principle, anything that we make obsolete, anything we phase out will go to Ukraine, or at least they get the first dibs on it, which is where all the VAB APCs are going and other bits and pieces. Ukraine is to receive another 180,000 rounds of ammunition for the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun from Germany. The order for a new batch of rounds of HEIT ammunition, high explosive incendiary with tracer, was booked in December 2024, funded by the German government. Good news there. In fact, as you can guess, German aid to Ukraine is going to come in and give us more detail here. So Ukraine will receive more newly produced Gepard Cheetah Spag ammunition and therefore secures its midterm needs. Rheinmetall has received a contract for 180,000 rounds of ammunition financed by the German government. Deliveries to Ukraine are planned to start in 2026. So actually, this is going into, quite what he says a midterm, quite far off. Rheinmetall has already contracted to supply 300,000 rounds, 50% APDST and 50% HEIT, so two different types of round, to Ukraine in 2023. Delivery of 150,000 APDST rounds was completed in December, and the first HEIT rounds have already been delivered, which means that production must already have been fully switched. With the planned delivery of 180,000 rounds from 2026, it should also be clear that most or all of the missing around 135,000 rounds of HEIT ammunition from the first contract will be delivered to Ukraine this year. And we also know that the new rounds that are being produced by Rheinmetall are better than the existing rounds in the kind of marketplace or in storages that are out there. So the new rounds they're receiving are really good, or comparatively better. Ukraine is announcing the development of one-way attack drones for river operations, and that's a drone there in action. The drone can carry up to 3 kilograms of explosives at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour. Wow. So that's basically your equivalent of an unmanned aerial vehicle flying at similar kind of speeds, distance of up to 10 kilometers, designed to destroy boats and berths and equipment, so it hits them at the level rather than kind of any top down, either dropping an ID or smashing into it, but flying from above. This can look at things from the level of the water and can hit things maybe under bridges more easily, or pontoons or whatever. It can apparently remain in ambush for several days, key there, with minimum battery consumption. That's fantastic innovation there. So they're 1 meter long, weigh 8 kilograms, reach up to speeds of 40 kilometers an hour with an operational range of 10 kilometers and carry a payload of 3 kilograms, sufficient to destroy small boats and watercraft. Excellent news, good innovation to stay ahead of the curve. Now, for the first time, Ukrainian first-person view FPV drones are using a naval drone, and we talked about this in the first video today, as a springboard, took out 3 Russian air defense systems, so 2 Pantsir S1s and an OSA. Incredibly high-value stuff, the Pantsir S1s particularly. So these were driven right round the sort of Kimburn Peninsula, Tendra Spit, and then all the way to Skadovsk. And the unmanned sea vehicle still has connection back to where the Ukrainians are based, ages away. And then the UAVs take off, the aerial drones take off, and I presume then have a repeater back to the operator using the unmanned sea vehicle as a repeater. And then those drones go off and find their targets inland. So rather than have to use a very expensive missile like an ATACMS or something, potentially has a greater range. It depends what the range of your control for the drones through the repeater of the USV and what the range of the USV is. But you can imagine a scenario where you have really good range for these drones, and you're able to hit these targets possibly better. Like with a missile, you're looking at satellite imagery and you're hoping it's still there, and you hit the coordinates. With a drone, you're flying into it and you can see in real time, and I guess you can make a case that these are more accurate than a more expensive missile. And if those missiles are $1 million a pop or whatever, if that unmanned sea vehicle can then return home, so you're not losing that USV, which is the expensive part of that, you're just using these FPV drones that are bouncing off that, then this is a cost-effective way of striking those targets if they're close to the sea. If they're sort of 10, 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers maybe from where the USV is parked up, then you've got, maybe draw a line of 20 kilometers all the way around Crimean Peninsula and up around that Kherson, Zaporizhia sort of area, the coastal area, you've got a new capability there. I think that's excellent. So this is super important. Super important. Right, Joint Expeditionary Force, JEF, has activated an advanced UK-led reaction system to track potential threats to undersea infrastructure and monitor the Russian Shadow Fleet following reported damage to a major undersea cable in the Baltic Sea. So this is where the UK, part of the JEF, I presume that's like, JEF partners and NATO will be alerted by a system. So the UK being quite a maritime nation, we're head of the Maritime Coalition for Ukraine Capability Coalition. And we've also part of this, seems like they're calling it, is that the JAF, which is Poland, France, Germany, the Baltics, Nordics, and UK, plus NATO there, wanting to be on top of what's going on in the Baltic Sea area in terms of cutting of undersea cables. We have a monitoring capability there now due to what the UK has activated. So good news there. Petr Pavel, who is the Czechian president, granted 40 permits. So he has to grant permits if you're a Czech civilian and you want to go and fight in Ukraine. So he's granted 40 permits to fight in Ukraine to Czech citizens, rejecting those 74 applications, but it is double the number from 2023. Every little helps there with the Ukrainians for absolute sure. A French army official has confirmed to Agence France Presse on January the 6th that several dozen Ukrainian soldiers serving in 155th Air and of Kiev Mechanized Brigade did desert while undergoing military training in France. French has said, quote, there have been certain number of desertions, but they remain very marginal given the volume of people who have actually undergone the training. So they said, so it's not, it's not crazy bad, but there have been some desertions. Now, Russia is to share, according to Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, outgoing, Russia is to share advanced satellite technology with North Korea. We have now heard everything and the kitchen sink is being given to North Korea in exchange for troops and equipment. But yeah, Russia to share advanced satellite technology with North Korea, that's going to upset the South Koreans, no doubt. Pretty much everything you can imagine appears to have been promised from Russia to the North Koreans. Now, I reported the other day that a Taiwanese company had been providing components to the Russians for their weaponry to be used in Ukraine, and that seemed rather controversial since Taiwan had been very supportive of Ukraine, saying the US needs to help support Ukraine before Taiwan, because actually China is looking at what the US does in terms of supporting Ukraine to learn what to do with regard to whether they attack Taiwan or not. Now, there might be some complexity to the claim that Taiwanese components were being used because Chinese companies that supply the Russian Federation with servo drives for the UMPK planning modules, so these guided guide bombs and Shahed drones. So the idea was this Taiwanese firm TRC had been providing them. Actually, a Chinese company or Chinese companies are illegally using the name of the Taiwanese company TRC to avoid sanctions. So they get by selling this stuff, or at least importing this stuff, they get around sanctions by pretending they're Taiwanese company. Actually, it's not the Taiwanese company that is creating these servo drives and then sending them to Russia. At least that appears to be something like that is going on. So the Taiwanese company TRC, at the request of the Russian Federation, manufactures and modifies servo drives to control UMPK modules, was the claim on the 4th of January, that convert unguided aerial bombs to high precision ones. So that was the original claim, but it could well be that actually it's Chinese companies that are manufacturing and supplying those, pretending to be Taiwanese. Now as queer as folk. Anyway, thank you very much for watching or listening. I really appreciate your support. Take care, guys, and I will speak to you soon. I'm just off out for lunch with my mum. It's like, I don't know, 800th birthday or something. No, obviously not. Don't be rude, Pierce. It's her birthday today. So off out for a spot of lunch, and I'll be back with you later.